Hi, my name is Justin Mann with Stonelink Property Management. I'm the owner and managing partner here, and I'm excited about today's discussion. We're going to be talking about the lead safety laws and the lead conformance certificates, and we have a great guest today with us. So if you're a landlord and you self-manage or you're with another property management company, regardless, this is going to be great content because the new laws that were passed impact you. So without further ado, really excited to introduce Sharon Barr, owner of Lead Safe RI. Sharon, welcome to the channel, and so glad to have you. And maybe, Sharon, for those that don't know your company, don't know who you are, what you do, you could give a little bit of background introduction because this is not your first rodeo around lead.
No, it is not. First of all, the full name of the company is Lead Safe Inspections and Consulting, Inc. So if you're looking up the full name, that's our company name.
Okay.
I have been in business for 20 years doing lead paint inspections. But I'm also a landlord. I've also been a real estate agent. I have managed in multiple properties over the years. I've bought properties, distressed properties, renovated them, and then managed them afterwards. So I've had the entire real estate industry is my life.
Yeah, I dare say that you're very well immersed and versed in all things real estate. Again, from landlord to real estate broker to management to ownership and everything in between. Well, that's great. Really appreciate the background there. So Sharon, the reason we want to sit down today is we want to have a conversation around lead conformance and lead conformance certificates. And a lot of people tuning in might think that this is new.
Yeah.
But the reality is the lead conformance certificate law as it is was actually passed, back in 2005.
Right.
But there were new laws that were passed in the last legislative session here in the state of Rhode Island, right, that are now driving conformance with the original law in a way that we've never seen before. And this is really where, if you're a landlord and you own real estate investment property, you really need to tune in. So maybe you could talk a little bit about, I think there's 4 elements to the new laws that really drive the point home that this is no longer something that you can afford to ignore. You have to pay attention to it. You have to get your lead cert. Let's talk a little bit about the laws. I know one of them was the Statewide Rental Registry.
Yes.
And again, neither Sharon nor myself is a lawyer. This is not legal advice. We're going to give you a topical overview of these laws as we understand them. But if you have specific questions, please talk to an attorney about these laws.
Right. Perfect intro to that. But lawyers are not really sure what we're doing with all of this either. They're trying to figure it out as we're going along. And it really won't be finalized as far as what they're going to do and how they're going to do it until it starts to be litigated. But as of next September, that's when these laws are going into play. Actually, one of them is already in play, but for the most part, I figure next September is when you're going to be having to comply. One of them says that if you are a landlord in Rhode Island, you have to register with the Department of Health. They're supposed to put a public database together. That's providing they get the money and the funding and can actually get the job done by next September. But they're only giving us the month of September to register. So between September 1st and October 1st, we're supposed to be registered. That includes all of our contact information. So any property managers, any landlords, you all have to register. If you don't register, there is a $50 per unit per month fine.
Wow.
Who knows how those fines are going to be implemented? Are they going to just automatically be charged immediately?
Right.
Or is it something where when you get found out 3 years from now that they can retroactively charge you? Or is it going to start then? That's the thing that the lawyers don't really know either.
Nobody knows yet.
Nobody has no idea.
TBD.
Right.
Okay, fair enough.
So that's the first part of that one.
Right.
The second part is you have to have your lead certificates in order to register. Now, there's a $125 per unit per month fine for not having your lead certificates. So that's where landlords have to take this seriously now, because however these fines get implemented, it total ends up being $175 a unit, and that's a lot of money per month.
Right.
Right.
So that can add up very, very quickly.
Of course it can, especially if you own multiple units.
And in fairness, that's money otherwise could be used to improve the property, improve amenities, add value to the property, help residents out that are living there. and now it's going to the state because you didn't follow the law.
Right.
Okay.
And as you mentioned, this isn't anything new. You're already since 2005, and if you really want to think about it, back to 1991, landlords were supposed to be doing this.
Right.
But the problem was nobody was enforcing it. They were hoping the cities and towns would enforce it, the building inspectors, but they didn't want to take on another job. So at least that's the impression we've heard along the way. So they said they didn't have the authority to do it. Well, the legislature gave them the authority this year. So they also are the ones that are now, they're pushing to have any building inspectors, if you get a violation for any reason, for them to add lead to it. So if you get a violation because you got tall grass, they're going to say, oh, by the way, we also want your lead certificates.
And we've actually seen too, just to kind of complement that, we've seen from a property management perspective, a lot now of active engagement by the cities vis-a-vis lead conformance certificates. This is now on the tip of their tongue. This is part of the conversation. It's no longer kind of behind the scenes or not being talked about, as you said, with violations. So clearly that's already started to manifest itself out there in the field.
It has. There's many cities and towns already doing it.
Okay.
Not all of them yet, but they're probably all going to get pushed to do it.
So we have the Statewide Rental Registry. So that's one piece of it. You also have to have now your lead conformance certificate, and that needs to be filed, correct? And I believe the deadline, correct me if I'm wrong, October 1 on that.
Yes.
So that's now another date in 2024 that's out there that we're all staring at as landlords that we have to comply with.
Yes.
But there are some other laws, and I think one of them we were talking about before we started filming here, the Escrow Account Bill. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that and how that works.
Sure. So that's, again, one of those things we're not sure how the courts are going to handle it. But if you as a landlord do not have your lead certificates, a tenant can petition the courts and ask them to put their money, their rent money, in escrow. Now the tenant can go and have the work done and then go back to the courts and say, here's my receipts to show that I spent the money.
Right.
And then who knows what the rest, if there's anything left over, it goes to the landlord, I'm assuming. But the tenants have the right to do that now. Now, the landlord does get notified, though, if the tenant petitions that. So the landlord at that point can go to the courthouse and sit with the judge and say that maybe they'll go back and do it. But this is something totally new, so we have no idea how this one's going to work. And
as of, correct me if I'm wrong, as of last Friday, November 11th, at the time of this filming, it was on November 11th, the Attorney General set out new guidance on how they're interpreting that particular aspect of the law. Because we've talked about September 1, we've talked about October 1, but as far as the Attorney General's concern is, their position is the escrow account component is in effect now.
Yeah.
So if you were a resident, that were a tenant that's living in a property, and you found out that the unit that you're living in doesn't have a lead conformance certificate, according to the Attorney General, and as we've talked about, we don't know how this is going to play out in the courts. We don't know how the judges are going to interpret this, but according to the Attorney General's guidance, they're saying this is effective now. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, that's what I understand too, that it went into effect immediately.
Okay.
So yes, as of right now, if a tenant wanted to do that, they could do it.
All right, so there's really all the more sense of urgency for a landlord today to, first of all, figure out, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, do I have a lead conformance certificate for my unit, for my building? And if the answer is no, okay, I need to get on this. I can't be saying, I'm going to deal with this in August at the end of the summer after I've had vacation and all that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah.
I really need to get on this now. There's a sense of urgency because a tenant living in their building could take action against them if they don't have a lead certificate, according to the guidance from the Attorney General.
Right.
Which again, this is brand new, came out last Friday.
Yep.
Okay. Other laws that you think, from your perspective, I know we've talked about some that are really now driving conformance. So we've talked about the Statewide Rental Registry, we've talked about the Escrow Account Bill, we've talked about the Attorney General's interpretation of that.
Yeah, there is one that I think is pretty important for landlords. If you are going to evict a tenant for non-payment of rent, you can't evict them without your lead certificates. Now, the way I understand it from some of the eviction attorneys is when you send out your 5-day demand, you should also include a copy of your lead certificate with that.
Right.
But if you don't do that, but at least by the time you petition the court and put go to them for the eviction, then you have to prove that you have your lead certificates.
Right.
They won't even take the case; it'll be thrown out. And
Right.
the lawyers that know the laws are not even going to take that eviction until you get your lead certificates.
Right.
So I think that's important for landlords because once you have a 5-day demand out to the tenant, now it becomes a contentious situation if it isn't already.
Right.
So you have to have your lead certificates before you get into a situation with the tenant, because then now they can hold up letting you in, letting you do the work, letting me in as an inspector. Now, if that happens, of course, you can get rid of them or petition the court again
Right.
to get access to the apartment or to evict them for not allowing access. But all that's money and time. And now they're not paying rent.
But theoretically, and not to play this out too far because we've got a lot of variables and we start playing 4D chess here, but theoretically, that resident could stop paying rent, which is what led to the non-payment of rent action, right? But if you don't have a lead certificate, to your point, now you've got to get that before you can even file the 5-day demand. If the resident wants to, they can try to impede that process, all the while still not paying rent.
Correct.
And then, of course, you're going through the actions of trying to not only get tested, but if remediation needs to happen, you've got to get back into the unit. And now you're working in potentially a hostile environment because the unit you're getting into, need access to, is occupied by somebody that you're trying to remove. And so you've got a real friction point there. No pun intended.
It's not a good situation.
So really the messaging is, again, this is not something that can wait.
Right.
If you're a landlord, really, it's something you need to get on now. The sooner the better, because you don't want to wait until you're in that situation. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely. And you have to get your properties ready. So waiting is until the summertime, and now your property needs work and you haven't gotten it ready between then and October 1st, maybe you can't get it done in time. So you need to start looking at your properties now to get them ready.
I think one more law that's worth talking about, because again, lead conformance isn't new. We've established that. But what is new with one of these new laws is the exemption. That was removed, correct?
Right. Yes. So up until now, up until January 1st, anybody who is owner-occupied 2 or 3 family was exempt from having to comply with this law. Why that was put in is a complicated answer, but we won't get into the reasons.
Probably beyond the scope of this discussion.
But it's always been, why should a tenant living in a multifamily unit that the owner lives on one of the floors
be less safe than
a unit that isn't?
Right.
Now, my interpretation of that has always been, well, the landlord's living there, most likely they're keeping up on the property better than maybe somebody who isn't living there because they don't see the problems on a day-to-day basis.
Fair.
So that may be.
You're right.
But at this point, that's gone. So if you live in a 2-family and you rent out the other side, you have to be in compliance now.
So that's a really big deal, because I know for those of you that are out there that have done real estate investment research, you follow Bigger Pockets or any of those types of resources, house hacking, as it were, one element to that is, hey, I'm going to buy a 2-family or a 3-family. I'm going to renovate it. I'm going to move into one and rent out the other. And then, of course, have that tenant cover some portion or all of my mortgage and kind of lather, rinse, and repeat. So there are a lot of landlords that are in owner-occupied buildings that heretofore legally were exempt from this and now are not.
Correct.
So this is where, again, everybody needs to be paying attention.
Yes.
Fair statement?
Absolutely.
Okay, terrific.
Yep.
So I think at this point now, we've kind of covered the catalysts as they are from the last legislative session that are now spurring action, or should be spurring action, on the part of landlords, and really paying attention, saying, I never knew about lead certificates. I never knew about lead conformance. I didn't know anything about it. Maybe I just bought my first real estate investment property. I didn't even know this was a thing. I know about maybe fire certs, and I know about, I want to make sure that I'm complying with all the minimum housing code, but nobody ever talked to me about lead certs. So I'm a real estate investor. I'm brand new to this. Let's start at ground zero. Where would you recommend somebody in that position to start? First off, here's a question. How do they even find out if they have a lead conformance certificate for the property they may have just bought or one they've owned for some period of time?
Gotcha. All right, so the lead certificates can be found on the Department of Health's website.
Okay.
Now, they do expire in most cases after 2 years. So if you've owned the property for more than 2 years, you're already not in compliance. But if it is something that you have only bought it 6 months ago and you're wondering if you have it, you can go to the Department of Health's website. It's not easy to find, but there is a tab that says Environment. You click on that, and then it says something about find out if your property is lead safe. Click on that, and then you have to, when you search for your property, you have to put in the town first and then the street. But don't put in the house number, just put the street in, and then you hit the search button after the street name. Okay. It's very complicated to do because if you try to do the street first and the town next, you're not going to get it. So it's a little backwards, but you can find it.
Yeah.
And but if nothing else, if you can't find it, just give us a call and we can let you know. We can look it up for you.
All right, terrific. And so for our audience out there, just understand we're going to be putting the links to all of these resources within the channel description below, and we're going to put together some instructions for you so that you know how to actually search for this yourself. But if you don't want to do any and all of that, you can certainly either contact us or contact Sharon. As she said, she'd be happy to help you out and walk you through this, because the first step really is knowing.
Yeah.
Like, do I have a lead conformance certificate or don't I have one? So if I do, great, yay, Christmas came early, right? But to your point, they all have an expiration date. But let's act as if I'm, again, that landlord. I've now gone through that process, or I've contacted your company, I've spoken to you, and you've determined, hey, bad news, you don't have lead conformance certificates for one or more of your units.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
So now what? Okay. So I need to take action. But again, I'm brand new. I don't know what to do. How do I get a lead conformance certificate?
Yeah.
Could we start with kind of step 1, step 2, step 3, so we can walk them through on how to do that?
Sure. Okay. So it's not, if people think lead paint is something that's going to cost them tens of thousands of dollars, if not more.
Okay.
And as long as you have a property that's in good condition, it's not that difficult to get. So the bottom line is you can't have any chipping paint or any damaged paint. Okay. No holes, no cracks, nothing. It all has to be.
Peeling paint, any sort of degradation of the paint surface.
Exactly. Any
chalking.
Damage whatsoever. Yep.
Okay.
Chalking. Chalking happens on the outside mostly.
Okay.
And so if you put your hand over it and your hand gets white, that's called chalking.
Yep.
So yes, that is an issue, but it's not as common as just obviously plain old chipping paint.
Okay.
So any damaged paint whatsoever, you need to touch it up. Then the second thing is a friction surface. So friction surfaces are things that rub together. Okay. So an old wood window, rope and pulley windows, or something that has a wood track. Sometimes you have to pinch them to open. So anything that has a wood track around those windows that rides up and down on, that's a friction point. Every time those windows go up and down, it creates dust. And dust is actually what poisons kids. Everybody thinks your kid's chewing on windowsills. That's not the case. I hear that all the time, but I've only seen teeth marks once on a child who was very oral, but that's the only time in 20 years that I've seen teeth marks.
And for clarity, again, going back to those friction points, I assume these are painted surfaces. Let me explain. If these are stained wood trim, stained windows, is that still something somebody should, because it's not painted, it's stained, but in your experience, is that still an area for one reason or another that could cause a problem?
Stain is in the regulations that it is a surface that is a concern.
Okay.
But I've tested so many stained and polyurethaned areas, and very rarely do I find it in the stain.
Okay.
But neither does stain peel like paint does.
No.
So you're not going to really have, your stain is not usually going to be your problem. So I wouldn't worry about the paint, worry about the stain. But the friction points, even if it's a stained window on the interior, the exterior of those old windows are always painted. They can't be stained unless they're a crank out. Sometimes they are. But if they're a double hung window, they're painted on the outside because otherwise the water would have ruined them. So that's a friction point. The next one is a door that's sticking. So again, if a door is stained, not as big a deal, but if it is a painted door with a painted trim, painted door jamb,
you've got that friction point.
If you have that friction of that door rubbing, you can always see up in the corners somewhere that paint is deteriorating. And that creates dust, gets to the floor, a child can pick that up. Oh, and let me say this is kind of a point to be made. It only takes, well, first of all, this was in a lawsuit that was against the paint companies years ago.
Okay.
It only takes half the size of your pinky fingernail for a child to get lead poisoned, significantly lead poisoned of lead paint.
Like actually truly negatively impacting
Yes.
their health, their development, their
Exactly.
all of the negative consequences of ingesting lead. That's
Right.
a tiny amount.
A small amount of a paint
Right.
chip. Now, dust is actually what poisons them more than anything, though, because you don't see that. You know,
Right.
dust is
And
on the
they're inhaling
floor.
it.
They might be walking around or crawling around on the floor, and they don't realize it. Contractors who are doing work are going to be disturbing lead. It's going to fly around in the dust, and then they can get poisoned, or the adults in the room can get poisoned. So it's a serious matter when you're, especially if you are going to be doing some of your own work.
I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah,
100%.
but it doesn't take much for adults or children to get lead poisons. Adults it takes us more than children, obviously.
We're going to talk a little bit later in this conversation around doing the work, what you need to do, certification, all that kind of stuff, but I don't want you to lose your train of thought.
Yeah.
I think we would be remiss in not bringing up pre-1978 construction, post-1978 construction, and how that's relevant to this topic in this discussion. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that for the audience that isn't familiar with the significance of that date, the lead paint law that went into effect, and the implication it has for this specific area.
Sure. So as of 1978, lead paint was banned, and it was federally. This isn't a Rhode Island law.
Right.
All of these laws, other than the ones that were just recently passed to enforce it, but the EPA and HUD are the ones that are actually dictating to all of the states across the country that you have to have lead certificates and lead regulations. So as of 1978, that's when they banned lead paint in the United States. It was banned in other countries much sooner than we were. But contractors liked it because it was a much harder paint. It lasted longer. So that's why they used it, and they didn't want it to go away. So it was fought that they didn't want it to leave, but it was banned. Okay. So as of 1978, anything 78 or newer doesn't need to have any inspections done on them whatsoever.
Okay. So if I own a building and it was built in 1980, I'm good as far as the inspection is concerned because there couldn't be lead paint in it because it was after the federal ban took place. You've mentioned to me in the past, and so now let's talk about buildings built before 1978.
Right.
There was a window of time, I think you've mentioned in the past, between 1960 and 1978, correct, whereby lead paint was more predominantly used in one part of the dwelling versus another, so that could impact the remediation that might need to take place, and where you're more likely to find the presence of lead and less likely. Maybe you could speak to that for a minute.
Sure. So up until 1960, we find it both inside and out.
Okay.
After 1960, we find it more on the exterior. Lead was taken out of the paint industry and given to the ammunition companies to make bullets because we had a war going on at the time.
Right.
So because of that, we didn't have as much lead available to the paint companies. And so as a result of that, they used it more on the outside because the weathers, the weather we have, especially around here, the paint lasted longer.
So it's that hardness, it was longevity, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So
and then up until 1978, it could be there. In the 1970s, we don't find it a lot.
Okay.
And I only know this because of my year's worth of testing it. So there's a couple of different ways that we test it, but I use this machine and I can test the different painted surfaces. So I do see after 1960 that it drops down. So I've seen the numbers myself.
And that's a great segue. It's almost like we rehearsed this, which we didn't, just for the record. That's a great segue into the types of inspections. So we've determined now that I own a building that was built before 1978. I don't have any lead certificates. I need to get an inspection done. And now you've just walked us through the types of things that I should be looking for as a landlord. And the good news is, if the building's in relatively good shape, right, paint condition, so on and so forth, there are probably some areas I need to focus on. You've talked about friction points, door jambs, windows, those kinds of things. We didn't talk a lot about it, but I know we've talked about this in the past. Even if you have a vinyl wrapped building, foundations, sometimes stairs, cases, railings, those kinds of things, obviously still are painted surfaces that need to be paid attention to. Without yet getting into the remediation, let's talk about inspection.
Yep.
Can you talk to us a little bit just briefly about the types of inspections, maybe the equipment that you use and how that works? And what can a landlord expect there?
All right, so the least expensive route for the landlord is strictly a visual inspection. We're not really going to test your paint. The reason for that is as long as the paint is intact and not a friction surface, then it's considered safe.
Okay.
So we can have lead paint. Rhode Island does not make you remove it. Massachusetts and other states, you might have to remove it. But in
real
Rhode
briefly,
Island,
you're talking about lead safe versus lead free. And here in
Yeah.
Rhode Island, we're lead safe.
we're a lead safe state, exactly. So we don't have to remove lead here in Rhode Island because, again, it can be safe. And first of all, it would cripple the industry, the real estate industry, because we have so many older houses. We just have lead everywhere.
Here was the vast majority is built before 1978.
Yeah, especially the rentals, for sure.
Right.
So the least expensive route for the landlord, like I said, is the visual one. So all paint intact, and we'll talk about that kind of stuff after. And then the second type of inspection that we would do is we have this X-ray machine that we have. I have it with me.
And I think you brought it with us. Could you show the audience?
So we can take a look.
Yeah.
So we have this machine here that
Not gonna lie, it looks like a ray gun. But
It does. And so we put this on any painted surface. Let me grab you a piece of paper for a minute. Because I need a white surface here. So we put this machine on any painted surface, and it's an X-ray. It reads right through all the layers of paint right down to the substrate and will tell us if there's any lead. If the number on this machine is 1.0 or higher, and you can see that 0.4.
I do.
So anything that is 1.0 or higher is lead.
So this would be
up to 9.9 being the highest.
Wow.
Yep.
And so
this is lead free, this piece of paper.
Yeah, that's terrific because I've been holding it this whole time. And by the way, this came out of a stack of papers I print and work off. So that feels good. Under what circumstances look, I'm a landlord as well. I know you're a landlord. Obviously, we want our residents to be safe. We want it to be compliant. We want to have our lead conformance certificates. But you talked about the types of inspections. The cheapest is the least expensive route is the visual. Yeah. But then if you decide you can go this route, why would you be using this machine? Why would you go that route? Because it's significantly more expensive, is it not?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So there's a couple of reasons. If you're purchasing a property and maybe you have children yourself and you want to know where the lead paint is, this is what we use.
Fair enough.
So we would come in and we would test everything in all of your rooms. We go room by room and test all of the different painted surfaces.
Okay.
So that's if, let's say you are buying maybe a single family house or even a multi and you want to know if it's safe for your kids too. Yeah. Let's say you're going to do some renovations. You want to know if there's lead paint there. We would come in and use it there. But then the other reason you'd use it is if you want a lead-free certificate. They're very difficult to get because you can't have one drop of lead, even if it's on your foundation. You can't have one drop of lead anywhere inside or out. And that if it's a multifamily includes the common hallways also. Okay. You can't just make a unit lead-free and not the commons.
Sure, because you have to pass through the common area to get to the unit.
Exactly. Right. So people are doing it though. I mean, I've done more lead-free certificates this year than I have probably in the last 10 years.
Really?
Yeah, because people who have already gutted their properties and renovated them over the years, they might not have been getting their lead certificates because they know they don't have any lead there. Okay. But now they have to prove it. Okay. So they'll prove it. They get something called a full lead safe certificate. It's the equivalent of being lead-free.
And that's the holy grail because there's no expiration date on it.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, let me say this, though. There is one caveat to it. Let's say you have vinyl siding on the outside. Mm-hmm. We can write this full lead certificate for you. Okay. Even though underneath the vinyl siding you might have lead paint. Right. You can still get that certificate because they figure it's 20 to 30-year fix on the vinyl siding. But if you remove the vinyl siding, that negates the certificate. So now you'd have to start from scratch.
It's probably a good time to mention too, again, we've said during this discussion, I know you and I have talked about this, the lead conformance certificate is really good for 2 years.
Right.
And it can be renewed if that same resident remains in place in year 3. And, without getting too much into the details, however, right, after the 2 years, you have to get some sort of renewal done. If it is the same resident, there is one method to go through, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that. But if at that 2-year mark, the resident moves out, right, it's a different renewal process. Can you just differentiate between those?
Sure. So once I do the inspection, it's good for 2 years, regardless how many tenants come and go. They at least give you those 2 years.
Okay.
At the end of that 2 years, it needs to be renewed, as you mentioned, And one of two things. When I do it, if the tenant is living there, and as
The
long
original tenant that was in place.
right, so
Okay.
I go and do the inspection today. Let's say Joe Smith lives there. I like Joe. He's my man.
Been great.
So if Joe Smith is still there in 2 years, then you can renew your own certificate as a landlord. There is a 3-hour seminar that you have to take just to know what to look for, but
Got
it's
it.
pretty much the same thing that I do.
Okay.
No chipping paint and the likes. Touch up anything that might need to be done. Then you fill out an affidavit, you send it into the Department of Health, and now you're good for another 2 years. You can do that every 2 years as long as Joe Smith stays there.
So keep the resident in place. They want to stay. You want them to stay.
Yep.
They're being a good resident. It's a great relationship. You essentially can, I don't want to overstate this, but get their 2-year renewal going through that process
Indefinitely.
in perpetuity, just
Yes.
moving forward.
Yep.
Okay, but the minute Joe moves out, and we'll all mourn
Right.
that day because he was a great resident, right? We now have to start over again.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So even though yours is good for 2 years, if he moves out in the middle of yours or 6 months after you renewed it, then you have to start from scratch and call somebody like us again.
Okay. So getting back to the inspections, I want to talk a little bit about costs now. We're going to assume that the vast majority of people that are watching this, listening to this, are real estate investors. We're talking about real estate investment property. So they're probably not too concerned for the purpose of this discussion around their own personal residence, right? So if we set the ray gun aside for a minute, right, and I certainly understand the value there, is it fair to say that the vast majority of your customers, your clients, are going with the visual, but there is another component. There's a swipe test that goes along with it, correct?
Yes.
And so can you walk us through what's the cost to do this?
Sure. So the cost on it is roughly about $150 to $170. That's
Okay.
what you're dealing with.
All right.
And you're right, it includes the visual part, but once you pass the visual inspection, we then take dust wipes. Those dust wipes have to be sent to a lab. They pretty much have to come in under certain limits, but lead free, really.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many times they fail. So I encourage people so much to clean.
Clean.
Yeah. And the EPA is actually petitioning to try to reduce the numbers what stands. For instance, a floor has to be under 10.
Okay.
They're actually trying to get it down to 3 now. They
So
haven't got that
they're
approved.
really kind of raising the standard
Right.
by lowering the number, actually,
Right.
if you will. So
And we
really,
already have a lot fail at 10. So I'm really not happy about having to go down to 3.
So we'll get into real quick. I just want to get through this piece, and then we'll get into
Yeah.
best practices and so
Yeah.
on and so forth. But so the first step is a visual inspection. You've talked about that. We don't want to see chipping, peeling, degraded paint, chalking, all that kind of stuff. Assuming you walk in there and it looks like this wall here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm pretty happy. Then you're going to go through the swipe test, right, that we just
Yeah.
talked about.
Yep.
And you're going to identify some areas where you think that type of dust could be because of your experience, and you send that off to a lab. And it's about 150 to 170. Is that per unit, per room, per
Yes, per unit.
per unit? Okay.
Yeah.
And then for common areas, because if we're talking about a multifamily, obviously you have common areas, access ways. How does that come into play?
Well, we
here?
have to take samples in the common hallway too. So the visual
course.
has to pass, and then we have to take dust wipes. So that's where I say between the 150 and the 170.
Okay.
It includes the extra samples in the hallway.
And then what about the exterior of the building? Because of course that's also included in lead compliance.
When we do the visual, it's interior, exterior, and common hallways. Everything has to be.
Okay.
Now, let's say during the winter time you have exterior issues that you can't resolve because it's too cold.
Okay.
They do allow us to write an interior only certificate, which is good until June 30th. So yeah, the landlord has to get that work done between now and June 30th. I can only write that through March 31st. So
Okay.
if you call me in April, the exterior has to pass too.
Okay.
But
Got
if
it.
you do it in January, you have until June 30th.
And they'll allow you to basically only test for interior units.
Yes.
And common areas, of course.
Yes.
Okay, so that's between now and June 30th. So all the more reason, if somebody as a landlord is interested in going that route, to act right now
Yeah.
and get on the ball. Okay, terrific. Makes sense. So let's say now, just to continue down this journey, this path again, I'm that landlord. So I've done the visual inspection myself before I called you to make sure that it looks like it. I've cleaned, and we'll get into the actual steps, best practices in a minute. You've come out, you've done your visual inspection, you've done your swipe test, you send those tests off. How long does that take to get the results back? And the follow-on quick question is, assuming they come back positive, what then does the landlord do to get that certificate, this thing we've been pursuing steadfastly?
Yeah.
And then the other question is, what happens if they fail? So first step is, how long does it take to get the results back? And then what happens, what steps does the landlord take, assuming it came back as passing?
Right. All right. So the lab is the time frame that holds anything up. So the time frame is about a week.
Okay.
For that pricing. Now, if you said to me, I have a Section 8 tenant that wants to move in and I need it immediately, we can get that quicker. We can get it as far in like a 2-day or a day and a half type of scenario.
Okay.
But that gets to be a little bit more money. It's probably another $50 a unit. It's not drastic.
Which may be worth it if if you're a landlord and you've got a resident ready to move in and it's a time-sensitive nature. I'm spending the $50 because I need this thing tomorrow.
You're better off getting an extra month's rent than
100%. It's a math discussion, right?
Right, exactly.
So for depending on your situation, that may be the right way to go.
So it can be done. It can be, if we get in today, we can get the results by the end of the business day tomorrow.
But it also, again, speaks to proper planning, working as quickly as possible and trying to get started now, not waiting, so you're not putting yourself in a position where you're having to expedite these lab tests. So the test comes back as passing.
Yep.
Yay, that's awesome. I'm psyched. Now what do I do?
So we immediately, the same day we receive the results, we pretty much turn our reports around and you'll get a certificate from us. We have to go onto the Department of Health's website, log into it, and then create.
You're seeing a lot of failures where you otherwise would have seen passing grades.
Right.
So here's the bad news story. So you do your test, it comes back, and it's the opposite. I failed.
Right.
Now what?
So now if we took the dust wipes, then all you have to do is clean. So if we took the dust wipes, that means you passed the inspection as far as anything else goes.
Okay.
So it's only cleaning. So if the dust wipes fail, we're calling you up saying, clean everything again.
Got it.
We have to resample everything again. We usually take a little bit of a discount off if we have to go back a second time. But we have to take all of the samples all over again. We can't just take the one that failed. They all have to pass on the same day.
And I understand, and we'll put a link to this, and I want to figure out where we can link to it on your site. You guys also have a pre-inspection checklist, maybe that it could be useful for a landlord. That'll be part of this process to help them prepare for the test and have a better chance of passing. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, any landlord who calls us, we go through all of that before we even make the appointment.
Perfect.
We don't want landlords to fail. We don't want to go out there and have you yell at us because something didn't pass.
Don't shoot the
messenger. And I'm the bad guy because your house didn't pass.
I get it.
But we don't want that either. I'm a landlord myself.
Right.
We all have expenses and our expenses have climbed drastically.
Right.
I don't want to have to charge a landlord 2 and 3 times. I just don't. That's not my policy. So we do spend 15 to 20 minutes, if not longer, on the phone with every customer that calls because we're explaining all the stuff to them that they need, what they need to do to get ready.
That's terrific.
And then we send them the pre-inspection checklist by email, so they also have it in writing. And then we also explain the cleaning process to you too.
Okay. So I've now contacted you again. I want to get my lead cert. I've contacted your company. I've talked to you. I've gotten the pre-inspection checklist. I've gotten educated on kind of what I need to do and what I need to look for. And I go into my property and I realize, gee, the good news is I haven't had anybody living in this unit for quite some time. Don't know what the circumstances are that would have led to that, but let's just assume that for the sake of discussion. But the bad news is this thing needs to be painted. Yeah. I've got peeling paint, I've got chipped paint all over the place, and it's in significant quantities where I've kind of really just got to repaint the entire unit.
Yeah.
Can I just go down to Home Depot, grab a couple of gallons of paint, grab a paintbrush, and go at it, or not?
Yeah. The word is not.
Okay. So that's a hard no.
It's a hard no.
Got it.
Now, that's not to say that people don't do it all day. Everybody does it all day long.
I understand. Okay.
But the EPA has said that a do-it-yourself landlord is considered a contractor because they're being paid by collecting rent. So
Okay.
that's the justification on EPA from EPA. So any do-it-yourself landlord must have some training. It's just an 8-hour class. We do offer those classes a couple times a month.
Okay.
But it's an 8-hour class. We start at 8 o'clock in the morning and then you're done in the same day. Now you're certified to say, yes, I have had some training.
Okay.
Department of Health wants you to register with them. Of course, they get a couple extra bucks for that too.
Sure.
Everybody wants
yeah. Everybody's got to eat.
So, but that's what you need to do if you are going to be working on a property built before 1978.
Okay.
Now, a contractor, same thing. I mean,
100%.
They have to be.
Okay.
So, I mean, your guys, your property managers or your property maintenance men, they all need to be certified in order to do the work.
And in fairness, we've already done that with Sharon and her crew.
Have. Yeah.
And so even if you're an owner occupied, even if you're self-managing and you're doing the work yourself, and by the way, as a shameless plug, your time is also worth something. So as an argument, you could say that there's another way to look at it. But nevertheless, so I own my own property. I'm doing the work on my own property. I might even live in this property. I still now have to get a lead conformance certificate. And in our scenario, our example, we're talking about, I need to do the work. And so that means I do need to get this certification, which you said is an 8-hour class.
Yeah.
What happens if I just kind of thumb my nose, don't know about it, forget to do it, and the EPA gets involved? Is there penalties? Is there fines? What happens?
Yeah. EPA does have a pretty hefty fine. Rhode Island has a much less fine, but if they decide they're going to call in EPA, EPA can fine you $37,500 per day per instance for you not being licensed.
For me to paint my bedroom as an unlicensed, uncertified lead remediation activity.
Yes. Now, there is one little exemption to that.
Okay.
If you're going to do less than 6 square feet per room, or 20 square feet per exterior, then you don't have to be certified.
Got it.
But any more than that, so if you come in and you're going to stop painting the entire apartment, obviously that's more than 6 square feet.
Okay. We're again here talking about best practice. Candidly, it seems to me that you really just need to go get this 8-hour training done so you have that in your back pocket, because while today you may not have 6 square feet on any one interior surface or 20 square feet on any exterior surface, tomorrow that might not be the case. And you want to be able to take action. Obviously, time is money. You want to be able to take action right away. You don't want to be held up by the fact that you don't have this certification, and you don't want to get a $37,000 fine from the EPA or whatever even the lesser fine is from the state.
Yeah.
So best practice, go get the certification, get that done, have that in your back pocket, and be prepared so that when that time comes, inevitably, you can get that work done. Is that a fair assessment?
Definitely.
Okay.
And now if you're dealing with a tenant living in the unit too, if you're not certified and now the tenant calls somebody on you, that puts you on some notice. So if you have to get your units done, especially, I mean, a vacant unit is easy, but when you're dealing with the tenants living in the units, and now you have to get your lead certificates, so you're going to have to go into those units and touch up what might need to be done. If
they're going to see you.
Exactly. And if a tenant decides, I don't know, if they're having a problem with you for whatever reason.
Or maybe they're just concerned because they might be aware of the law and realize, I don't know, this guy looks like a clown. He doesn't really know what he's doing. He's just slapping paint against the wall like he's throwing mud. This doesn't seem like it's really part of the process.
And
they might just be concerned.
I got to tell you, that happens often. It does happen often.
It's like,
tenants do complain.
Yeah, so if that's the case, having the certification protects you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Let's talk now. I mean, candidly, again, understand that this is driven by safety, understand the laws, understanding how we got here. So now I'm that landlord. You've instructed me on what I need to do. I've done the work because I got certified. I've taken the steps necessary. I've cleaned the way I've been instructed by you guys to clean, and I've gone through all that. And having done that, I've gotten tested. I passed. I got my lead conformance certificate. What I also have is a giant hole in my bank account because, by the way, none of this is free.
Yep.
You have to get paid. Paint costs money. My time is worth something. Or maybe I hired a contractor to get this done because I didn't have time to do it myself. Time was of the essence. Is there any financial relief in the form of grants or tax credits for a landlord for this type of activity?
Yep. So there's a couple of things. Some of the cities and towns, Central Falls and Woonsocket and Cranston and East Providence, all of those communities all have some money available. There are qualifications though, and they all have, every time they write a grant, they have different qualifications. There is an income component to that. If there are tenants living there, the tenant's income comes into play. So I don't know all the particulars of that end of it, but you can apply to any one of them.
But there are some grants that exist.
Yes.
Okay. And it's really on a town-by-town basis.
It is.
Fair.
In that case, it is. Rhode Island Housing also also has some money available too for that same thing. Yes.
Okay.
So that's across the state.
Okay.
But in these communities, or any communities, Providence is another one, I forgot about them. They have money too. So any of these communities, Rhode Island Housing is going to send you to them first. If for some reason you don't qualify there or they can't get it done, then you can go to Rhode Island Housing.
Okay.
Rhode Island Housing is handling a lot of the poisoned children. So if there's any children that are lead poisoned, they're the ones that handle them. So they will hire the contractor to go in and do the work.
Okay.
So that's the first thing. There is those types of grants. Not everybody's going to qualify for that though.
All right.
The second one,
specific supply. People need to research that and figure it out on a case-by-case basis.
Exactly.
Okay. Option 2.
Yeah. So the second one is there is a tax credit.
Okay.
It's a refundable credit, meaning if you're going to get $1 back, you're going to get maybe $1,500 and $1 back. So there's two parts to this tax credit. The first one is, let's say you have to go in and repaint in between tenants. You're going to go in and spend $1,000 and repaint everything.
Okay.
You can qualify for that $1,000 reimbursement if you are a Rhode Island resident. Okay. And you can pass a lead inspection when you're done.
Okay.
So if you live in another state but own property in Rhode Island, you don't qualify for this.
What about
you must be a Rhode Island resident.
Okay, you have to be a Rhode Island resident, even if you have a property manager. This is not a shameless plug. It has to be the owner of the building and has to reside in Rhode Island to qualify for this refundable tax credit.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, you must file a Rhode Island resident tax return.
Okay.
That's the key. That's how they know.
Got it.
And so you can qualify for $1,500, up to $1,500, depending on how much you've spent, just having to go repaint everything. You can qualify for a $5,000 reimbursement if you are going to be removing some lead. Okay. So let's say you have old rope and pulley windows, but you also have some old doors that are lead. We would have to come in with the machine that we have first, test everything, show you where there is lead.
Right.
Now you're going to change the windows, but you're not going to change the doors, let's say. That's okay. The cost of replacing the windows qualifies you for $5,000. If you only spend $4,000, you only qualify for $4,000, but a maximum of $5,000.
Okay, understood. Getting back to the first example, just to be clear, because you said it's a refundable tax credit, is it up to $1,500? Meaning I go in, I repaint my unit, and it costs me $1,000 in your example to repaint the unit. I'm getting refunded $1,000 as a tax credit, not $1,000 plus $1,500 or not the $1,500. So it's really up to $1,500. And is there a limitation on the number of times that a Rhode Island resident can apply for this refundable tax credit?
Yes. Once you use it, you can't use it on that unit again.
Okay.
So, and you can only get 3 units per year. And 3 units per building.
Got it.
And that's a per unit thing. So you can get 1,500 times 3.
Okay.
Or you can get 5,000 times 3 if you're replacing lead somewhere. But the 5,000 part of it is about removing the lead.
Right.
So it's not just like, we have it all here. You need 2 inspections to prove that you have the lead, and then the second one to prove that it's gone. So, but with those 2 inspections and your receipts to show you spent the money, you then can apply for this reimbursement.
Having done all that, understanding it, it's still not a guarantee, because my understanding is there's not an unlimited supply of money to fund this. It's not like, whoever applies, we're going to get you that $1,500 credit or whatever you qualify for.
I wish that was.
Right. So what are the realities on the ground of the funding available for these refundable tax credits?
All right, so they have $250,000 in the budget for this every year.
Okay.
I hope that would go up someday, but it hasn't yet.
Fingers crossed.
So it's $250,000 every year in the budget. Everybody that applies, they will separate you into 3 groups. The first group is if your income is below $52,000, let's say. This year it's 51 and change, so let's say it's 52. if your income is, the landlord's income is below that number, you get the money before anybody else.
Okay.
The second is if you had tenants with income below that bracket, and you don't have to ask the tenants, you just give the tenants' names to the Division of Taxation, and they will look up their income because they had to file a tax return. So the third group is everybody else. So the first group gets the money, then the second group, and then what's left over goes to the third group.
Okay.
The third group is everybody's income's above the limit. If let's say they need $150,000 to give everybody what they're looking for, but they only have $100,000 left, everybody in that group gets 66%. So it's not like if you apply in January and I send mine in April.
First come, first serve.
No.
Okay. So there's some, equity there.
And part of that is you're not going to see the money until August for that reason, because they need to know how much money they need for that
They got to
third
do the
group.
math.
They
Right.
do.
Okay.
So, and they have to make sure everybody's got the proper paperwork, the proper receipts, because you have to send in copies of your receipts and everything. So all of that gets sent in, then they're going to put you in those categories. The history of the program shows that last year, for instance, everybody in that third group got 88%. The 2 years before that was 100%, but other years it's been in the 60s range. Only 1 year was it less than 60%.
Okay.
So if you're going to get $3,000 instead of $5,000, I'm happy with three even.
Yeah.
You know,
Certainly would take that over nothing.
exactly.
Right. So, and my understanding is you've actually gone through this process as far as the tax credits are concerned.
Yep.
So you've been through it. It works. There's actually
Definitely.
a little bit, there is something at the end of the rainbow. And so for those landlords out there that have figured out that A, I don't have a lead conformance certificate. B, these are the steps I have to take for remediation. C, I've gone through that. I've gotten tested. I passed. I got my lead conformance certificate. It's worth it for them to, assuming they haven't already done it 3 times within that calendar year, it's worth it for them to apply for these refundable tax credits to get some monetary relief for the money that was spent to get those certificates in the first place.
Right.
Okay,
right.
terrific.
It's funny. I had one landlord say to me, "I don't believe it." He's like, "I'm taking your word." He shook my hand and he says, "I'll believe it because you told me, but I'll believe it when I see the check in my hand."
Got it.
And he got the check in his hand for $11,500, and he was very happy.
Yeah, I'm sure he was very happy about that and happy that he took your advice and listened to you and trusted you.
Yeah. One thing I do want to
terrific.
say with that, though, is you absolutely must have the form in by April 15th.
Okay.
If you extend your taxes to October, you'll lose this money. So even if you extend your taxes, the form that goes along with this credit must be in by April 15th.
Okay, so if I file an extension, which personally I have to do every year,
Yep.
I still need to get that form in by April 15th.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'm sensing a real theme here through this discussion. Point is, don't delay, act now, take action now, because there's a lot of reasons, both monetary as well as health. Let's start with, the most important, right? We wouldn't want to have units out there that have lead, or I should say that aren't lead safe, that don't have that lead conformance certificate. First and foremost, health first. But then secondary or tertiary to that, we want to make sure that we're moving with deliberate speed to comply with all the deadlines that are happening. And there are monetary incentives to do that, both from a penalty standpoint, kicking in September 1st and October 1st, but also from a reward standpoint, because if I miss that April 15th deadline, I don't get the tax credits, which is significant money.
Yeah.
That's really good to know.
We haven't done our taxes yet. I mean, it's only January now.
I know.
And so
it'll be here tomorrow. I'm sure it'll be here before we know it.
But the thing is, if anybody's done work last year during 2023, they can still pass a lead inspection right up until April 15th and still use the receipts that they had from last year. Yes.
That's
so
terrific.
the lead inspection can be in the next year, but the receipts are what dictates what year you can use those receipts.
So the receipts from the work that was done, if it was in 2023, last year, I just have to keep reminding myself we're in 2024, can be used to file for your taxes still, even if the test was done January 7th or whatever the case was.
Or April 13th.
Or April 13th, because you really want to cut it that close. That's really good information. Sharon, quite frankly, it's hard to overstate how valuable this has been. I really know that and believe that our audience is going to get a tremendous amount of value out of this. You're a font of knowledge on this subject matter. I could continue all day long like this, but unfortunately, our time is up here. I want to give you, kind of last word as far as what you want to give for advice out to any of our listeners, people watching this that are interested in or need to know more about this.
Yeah. Well, our company has been around for quite some time, and I do have somebody that answers the phone. People want to actually get a live person You know?
Shocker.
Yeah, imagine that. So I do have people that answer the phones all day long, and then I answer them at night and weekends if need be too. So feel free to give us a call anytime. We'll go over everything with you. We're there for you. We're there to educate you. That we're there to help you through the process. Like I said earlier, we're not looking to make you fail or put you under the microscope, or we're never going to report you to the Department of Health. That's not our job.
Right.
So we're there just to help you. I have people in the office all the time, and we get our reports out quickly too. So we'll turn things around for you.
Really driving forward with safety, compliance, and getting it done in a timely manner.
Yep.
I know the actual name of the company. Say again, please.
Lead Safe Inspections and Consulting, Inc.
Okay. Personally, I always know you as Lead Safe RI. That's how I find you all the time.
Well, that's my website is leadsaferi.com.
So if you go, and we'll have a link to all of Sharon's contact information, as well as other resources that we put together. Again, Sharon, thank you so much. My name's Justin Mann, Stonelink Property Management. If you have more questions about this topic, Sharon is a tremendous resource. Again, you'll have her contact information in the channel, and you can also contact us here at Stonelink Property Management. We would be happy to answer any questions you have. Stay safe, be well. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day.